Well, let's talk about how serious it gets. We have this story here from the National Review. The New York Times suddenly discovers Hunter Biden laptop and corruption investigations are real. This is amazing. Yeah, Hunter Biden is being investigated for crimes. And the reporting is that he paid off, he took a loan out, I guess, to pay off his tax burden, hoping they wouldn't indict him. But apparently the feds don't care because they were like, if you falsify your taxes, you're in trouble. Paying it off later doesn't change anything.
Or how about illegally register, get a handgun rather?
You know what's funny about that is the double standard. So for those not familiar, Hunter Biden, what did he do? He lied on his application.
Gun application, absolutely.
Yeah, he lied on it, saying he didn't do drugs. When
drug
he
use, yeah.
definitely did drugs.
Yeah.
Right.
And a lot of them.
Yep.
But
And it's on video everywhere.
Yeah.
here's the challenge, right? The first challenge is the double standard. We all agree that's a problem. You don't get to come out and say we got to follow these rules, and then the president's kid gets to break all the rules. The second thing is, however, I think it's burdensome to get a firearm in the first place. And so maybe there's an argument about a simple background check that doesn't even take that long. But if you have a right to keep and bear arms, then we got to talk about what the Constitution means and what the limits are. So I'm always wary to come out and be like, oh, he had a gun the wrong way. And I'm like, well, if he was doing drugs, that I get. Now you're a criminal, and your due process, you through due process, you do lose certain rights.
That's right.
That's true. But I also want to make sure we keep the door open to say, like, I'm a big fan of nationwide constitutional carry. So
There was a bumper sticker that came out in Texas. I don't know about up here, back probably in the 60s or 70s, and it said, "When guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns."
Yep.
It's just that simple. The criminals and the thugs. And Ronald Reagan said it. He said the best way to get gun control is to lock up the criminals and thugs that have been convicted of a gun crime, put them behind the jail, and then if you don't throw away the key, at least lose it for a long time.
Well, here we go. We now have the New York Times openly admitting that, let me read a little bit here. They say, if you are really industrious, you can dig 20 pages into the A section of today's New York Times and find a 1,700-word news story by 3 of its top reporters relating that the Justice Department's investigation of President Biden's son Hunter is not merely a tax matter. Turns out that prosecutors are probing his penchant for cashing in on his father's political influence through payments by overseas entities for which he did not register as a foreign agent. Well, even better, if you wade 23 paragraphs into the story, you will learn that prosecutors are examining emails between Biden and his business associates that come from a cache of files that appears to have come from a laptop abandoned by Mr. Hunter Biden in a Delaware repair shop. You don't say. This is the story that the New York Times had said was, Russian disinformation. Maybe not the New York Times, because I want to misquote them, but I know several reporters were saying it was disinformation. It was questionable.
Biden himself said it was Russian disinformation.
Jen Psaki said it was Russian disinfo,
right.
according to these intel sources. Politico, it was Natasha Bertrand. She was with Politico and now CNN, put out this story, which was a fabrication. Because I love this. Glenn Greenwald's reporting. He said, even in the story where she said, intel sources say it was disinfo, the intel sources said, we are not saying it's disinformation. We're saying we don't trust the information. So this lie comes out. Now, the big issue is the media lies to us. Not every single entity. I mean, the New York Post, they published this. They were getting us that information. Big tech colludes with the media. And now, because of this, there's a few interesting polls. Media Research Center and Rasmussen found, I believe it was Rasmussen, that if regular people, if you're voting, if American voters were aware of this story, around 6 to I think 17% would not have voted for Biden. Doesn't mean they're voting for Trump, but that would have had a big impact on the election.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now think about the war in Ukraine. With Russia invading and Ukraine saying we want these MiG fighter jets, we want NATO support. And who's the president? A guy with corrupt business dealings through his son in this very country. And that has me worried. These are the ramifications of media lying to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So 45% of Biden voters said they did not know about Hunter Biden's deals, and 9.5% said, as you mentioned, they would not have voted for him had they known. And now the New York Times is coming out and saying, hey, remember that thing we called you crazy conspiracy theorists for believing? Well, put $1 in the jar, because a couple months later, you're allowed to believe that thing.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we saw all the time. We in our district, I'm a very conservative district. I took Ron Paul's place in Congress.
Oh my!
Oh wow. Yeah, very conservative district on the Gulf Coast, and we get
big
that,
shoes to fill.
Yeah, I was going to say that is a tough spot to be in.
Big shoes to fill.
Quite an honor.
Well, thank you. You betcha. And I had his endorsement when I ran, along with Governor Rick Perry and then Attorney General Greg Abbott and Ted Cruz, and I can go right down the list because they know how conservative I am. But we put all that information out in our district, making that point, and the Jefferson County in our district was the only swing county out of 254 counties in Texas. We're turning them red. They were Democrat. A lot of salt to the earth people, fishermen, welders, electricians, a lot of refineries and stuff on the coast. And the Jefferson County voted for Obama in 2008, re-election in 2012, and in 2016 they went for Trump.
Wow.
So they got it down in our district. Yeah. We wish we could duplicate that, replicate that, across the country. You bet. They knew that.
But they purposely put it out. They wanted to suppress the story right before the election.
Yeah.
That's when it came out. That's when it hit. It was Project Veritas that dropped it?
No, it was New York Post.
It was the New York Post. Who dropped the story? I mean, who put out the story, though, that we found Hunter Biden's laptop?
The New York Post.
It was?
I'm pretty sure the New York Post was the first to publish the story.
Yeah, that's why they got taken off Twitter.
Yeah, and they got, you couldn't even share messages.
I remember that, Lydia.
Yeah.
You couldn't message a friend the link.
That's
Twitter,
right.
Twitter was
That's right.
blocking it.
I remember that.
Talk about evil people. Authoritarians, oligarchs, whatever you want to call it. So my question is, over the past several months, I've just been saying, at a certain point with all the lies, Jussie Smollett, now a free man, believe me, how about that? We get stories every single year, some big news cycle, some big protest, and it turns out to be a lie or a manipulation. And I'm just thinking, how do we just finally say to the likes of CNN and the New York Times or whatever, you guys can go play over there with your dwindling audiences, and we're going to keep the truth here and have these conversations somewhere else. How do we create our own narratives, right?
Well, one way was what you said earlier. Hey, look, tell your friends about this show.
Right. That's why
share,
I do it.
Share. You bet.
You hear that, everybody? The congressman says share the show.
That's right.
Share. You bet.
Well, right now we're chasing our tails, though. Republican messaging in general is still having to respond to the national media, the mainstream media. And instead of putting our own content out, we are again, responding to fake news stories over and over again, rather than highlighting what we should be doing and what's wrong.
That's what the narrative is, and what should we be focusing on?
Yeah.
Sure.
You guys familiar with the Defiant L's? You ever see Defiant L's on Twitter and Instagram? It's great. Defiant L's takes two tweets and places them together for comedic effect. The first tweet we have here is from Jen Psaki, who says, Hunter Biden's story is Russian disinfo, dozens of former intel officials say. They didn't. That wasn't true. And then below it is the New York Post. Hunter Biden's infamous laptop confirmed in New York Times report.
Yep.
It's a scary prospect.
Oh, you can't make this stuff up. Well, I mean, they can.
Yeah.
It's all they do.
Yeah, it's all they do.
Yeah.
The scary thing, I suppose, is we laugh at being right and we laugh at the absurdity. But look at gas prices, look at inflation, look at the Afghanistan withdrawal, look at what's going on in Eastern Europe. These lies and this manipulation is burning our country to the ground.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is, the left, the Antifa, when they get tricked, they scream until their vocal cords shred and they smash windows and start fires.
Right.
We point out the lies and start laughing and saying, haha, we were right the whole time. There's this vile rage that is being wielded through the manipulation of the media that does give them power. And it's causing problems and harm to this country.
Well, that's all the attention is aimed toward them, and then they say, what can we? These poor people, they don't need more police. They need social
workers.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you can't make this up. What did Reagan say? Lock up the thugs and the criminals and throw away the key.
A little much for me. I'm a bit libertarian in a lot of these respects, but I think the issue is we're seeing the other side of that extremism from the progressives in places like New York, where they let all the criminals out.
Oh, sure.
And then there was one guy who was like a 40-time repeat offender who was laughing, being like, "Y'all locked me up the first time and just let me go," and it's like he's going to keep doing it. So there's a real challenge. I think the big challenge is with big cities, though. I really am not a big fan of cities. I grew up in cities, lived in them until only the past few years. I think, I come out here to the middle of nowhere. Everything's much more relaxed. It just absolutely, you're more likely to know who your local deputies are.
Sure.
You go and meet them, you talk to them, you elect your law enforcement. You go to these big cities and it's just faceless law enforcement, faceless judges. Nobody talks to their neighbor. And that leads to the kind of authoritarianism. It leads to the police brutality the left is complaining about all the time.
Yeah, well, let me brag on Texas for a minute, because where I'm from, we know all of our elected officials, and I live in a district, of course, we're about not quite 900,000 people now with the redistricting. And in my county, one of the biggest cities is League City. It's about 110,000, and then Beaumont's about 100,000. And so there's big cities around, right? And we know all of our elected officials. In Texas, we're so pro law enforcement, pro-life, and pro-gun. You can go right down the list. We know, and they know us too, and they know they can depend on us, and we can depend on them. Probably not so much in the Northeast, Chicago, West, the left coast, as I call it, some of the others.
Yeah, this is so. I think one thing that's really important in the discussion about police is that New York is very, very different from, Beaumont, for instance.
Absolutely.
So people in New York, when they're saying defund the police or whatever, they're talking about a bunch of different problems. My response to a lot of these, blue city urban police departments is they were locking down people for COVID, violating their constitutional rights, shutting down churches. So I'm like, by all means, get rid of them. Why? Well, these are Democrat voters in Democrat cities who voted in Democrats who appointed these cops. The cops shut down churches. Now they want to get rid of them. I'm like, good, get rid of them. Do your thing.
I say let it happen. Look at what's happening in Seattle right now. Let them destroy themselves. And
Exactly.
you see all these murder rates going up and crime and
the
now
serial killer in New York.
But even in Amazon's moving their one of their main headquarters out of Seattle because of all the violence that's been happening on the street. And so the people that are in that city have to look around and say, this is what we get for saying defund the police. This is what we get for these little. Let them destroy themselves.
In Texas, I wasn't there this time. Of course, I was in Congress, but they passed a bill this last time about sanctuary cities that said, look, if you're a sanctuary city in Texas and you don't believe in enforcing immigration law and all those things, you don't get any state funding. You want to defund your police and be a sanctuary city and you want state funding? Nope. If you're a sanctuary city, you get zero funding. Austin was one of the ones who cut the police. I think it was
going to say, are they just pointing the finger at Austin right there?
The People's Republic of Austin. and I think they defunded, it's like 100 or 110 million. I forget the exact amount. And so Greg Abbott and company got in gear and they said, that's fine. You want to defund the police? Well, you get no more state money. And by golly, do you know that it wasn't a very short order, I don't know, a month or two later, that Austin came back and put 110 million or whatever dollars it was back in the budget for the police?
All this kind of stuff, freaks me out because you've got people from California moving to Austin, moving to Texas. And what they don't understand, we had a ton of people telling us, you guys should move to Austin. And we're like, we're going to go to West Virginia, or at least the West Virginia area for the most part. And the thing about Texas is when Joe Rogan, for instance, he's a good dude. When he moves to Austin, it's because he thinks California's going crazy. And you can reasonably talk to him and say, you're not going to support those kind of policies, are you? And he'll tell you, he's like, oh, I wouldn't do that. I'm not going to move to an area. But support staff? What happens when Elon Musk, he moves to Texas, right? Mm-hmm. He's going to bring his factory. Those employees are going to move with him. These are California residents. They're going to vote blue. And he's going to bring them all into Texas. And he's going to start bringing in Democrats into Texas. So that freaks me out.
It's concern for us, too. And, of course, it's a free country. You can cross state lines, but what we want to do is make sure the Californians have to apply for a passport, right, and a visa to come visit Texas. And we laugh about it, but it really is true. And there's talk about from the Texas delegation up here that there's been reported signs in California that says the last one out of California, turn off the lights.
Wow.
So the amount of people coming to Texas, 1,300 people a day. Not all from California.
Yeah,
right.
DFW every 3 minutes gets a new resident.
Wow.
Every 3 minutes.
Every 3 minutes,
Florida,
DFW area. Yep.
Florida and Texas, I think, are seeing the largest population increases.
Right.
Now, I will say, and maybe I'm being a little naive here, but I just want to try to throw some optimism in. There are a lot of conservative people in California who just don't vote in any of their elections because they see their state as hopelessly blue. And I hope that those are the kinds of people moving off to Texas. And so you're going to have an influx of red voters as well. But obviously, the blue voters coming in and trying to change the face of the political scene, there is a huge problem.
Yeah, it is, Seamus. And we're not unaware of that. There's actually a group that's out there registering voters.
Great.
We go back and we look at California. Now, the ones you talk about that don't vote, they're not going to be on record. But we're going back and, you can't find out how somebody voted, but you can find out if they voted. And if they voted in a Republican primary, they identify as a Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green, or whatever, or independent. And the group is busy working right now identifying those Republican voters. And when they come to Texas, they're sending them a letter in the mail with are you registering to vote? Here's your chance. You're registered to vote.
That's amazing. Good for you guys.
Are you familiar with Scott Pressler?
Know the name. Why do I know that name?
He's probably the most famous voter registration activist right now. Yeah, there's memes about him because it's, you'll see a tweet from someone where they're like, I'm just sick of the city. I moved to Texas. And then he responds right away, have you registered to vote at your current address? So there's a meme where it's like a dog answers the phone and the dog's like, hello. And he's like, hey, this is Scott Pressler. Have you registered to vote?
Yeah.
But he's done amazing work in, I think his work has led to the Republican Party in Florida becoming bigger than the Democratic Party, something like that.
Yeah.
Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. But if you want to check out the full show live, tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. And if you want more special access content, head over to timcast.com and become a member. Your membership helps sustain this company, keep our journalists employed, makes this show happen, and you will get access to exclusive members-only segments of the Timcast IRL podcast, and there's a massive library to check out. So again, go to timcast.com or tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., and we'll see you all there.